My name is Mikael Pan, and I will be your guide through this movie about the Swedish river Ångermanälven. During the movie, we will talk about some problems in the river, mainly caused by the hydropower plants, and we will also give some possible solutions to these problems. I hope you enjoy it.
The river Ångermanälven is the third longest river in Sweden, stretching more than 450 kilometers, with a catchment covering over 30,000 square kilometers, of which 7% are lakes. The river has always been important for the people living next to it. These 6,000 to 4,000 years old petroglyphs shows the abundance and importance of the wildlife from the river. In 1870, the riverbed in Emforsen was blown up and straightened out to ensure that the timber could travel downriver without breaking. Today the river contains at least 24 different species of fish, many of which are depending on the free-floating water. Even other organisms such as the freshwater mussel and mammals like the otter and the beaver are depending on the river. The otter needs a great distance of water without bigger obstacles like power plants in its often 10-kilometer long home range. When the timber floating was expanding as well as the hydropower, riverbeds were cleared from rocks to make sure the logs didn't break and to get a more even flow. They started off a chain reaction, making the water flow faster since there were no big stones slowing it down. The water then washed away the gravel from the river floor where the salmon species are laying their eggs, destroying the habitat for the salmon. The big stones which oxygenate the water were gone. It also created pockets of slow-floating water for the fish to rest in, where leaves and other important nutrient sources could be caught and consumed by the decomposers. This food source is the far most important one for the organisms living in the riverbed, such as insects and crayfish. Hydropower plants keep a large amount of water in the dams during the summer and autumn to release it during the winter when the price is higher. This way of controlling the water is totally opposite of the natural conditions, which put tremendous stress on the life in and around the water. Sometimes short-time regulations allow the water flow to change rapidly, making organisms float away by the high-speed water or dry out in the dry riverbed, leaving a stone desert behind. During the winter, high flow can bring much dissolved carbon underneath the ice, creating oxygen-poor areas or areas without dissolved oxygen, killing off many of the life forms. During the winter and spring, subcolded water and ice reaches the riverbeds in the hydropower regulated waters, increasing the stress or killing off many bottom-living organisms. Downstream from the power plants, the higher water speed created during the opening of the floodgates increases the erosion of the riverbanks, clearing it from smaller particles, which eventually will fall down to the bottom, polluting the riverbed with silt.
Everything we mentioned so far in the movie leads to an enormous extra consumption of energy for the organisms living in the water and making them less viable.
In 2000, the European Parliament agreed on a water directive to ensure that a good ecological status was kept in the waters across Europe. Today the status of the river is good chemically speaking, but not as good when it comes to its fauna. The projects to restore rivers, such as Ångermanälven, are very long processes and there is a lot of money on stake. Some counties have started to restore areas and some are in the pipeline to do so. However, not much has been done, and following are some possible actions that I find could help restoring and keep the flora and fauna around the rivers. The most important one is to keep a minimum level of water in the river and get rid of dry riverbeds to ensure a minimum amount of water all year round, increasing the possibility of a full comeback of the water organisms. To mimic the natural variations in the water flow during all seasons would ensure that the water flows as it did when the organisms adapted to it during thousands of years of evolution. In the summer, a minimum level of 40% of the natural water level would give the salmon a good chance to live and reproduce in the waters. To restore the riverbeds, blocks and gravel can be put back into the water, as well as making it meander, creating fast floating parts as well as slow floating. To ensure that the salmon can reach its spawning grounds, fish ladders could be used. And when it's time for the small fish to move out to sea, it would be a good time to open the water flow and stop the turbines to make sure they survive the trip. During this time, the power plants would have a chance to do maintenance. From what I've learned, executing the restoration projects mentioned earlier in this movie would in a 10-year period ensure a good ecological status in our rivers far into the future.